Hey there guys, welcome back to ARTFX Studios. This is another bass design video. It's been a really long while, but we're back with more bass design. Today I want to talk about something that is maybe quite like a Koan sound, Neuro square wave Reese. It's a process I'm doing. It's a three-step process that I'm doing here, and I want to show you that. Now the final sound sounds a little bit like this. So, as you can hear, it's a really neuro-ish kind of bass, and I've done quite some stuff to arrive at this, and I'm gonna take you through the entire process. The first track I've got right here is my instrument rack. This is the actual instrument rack that I used to create this bass patch. Now, as you can see, I'm using mostly Ableton Live native effects. I'm using a few effects outside of Ableton Live, a few third-party effects, but the majority of all these effects and instruments that I'm using for this bass is Ableton Live native stuff. So it should be pretty easy for you guys to follow along if you want to. Now, let me zoom in on this first part. And let me do that. So, this is the actual patch, or the actual, the track. And you can see the notes I'm using here. Now, when I do bass resampling, there's one thing I always try to do. Is I create one version that has pitch differences, like this, that actually has those pitch differences, it has pitch bends in it, and then I also have another version which is just the root note. I do that because sometimes when you want to do resampling, and I'm working on a tune, I'm looking for a bass sound, I might find this one, and it's good, but I don't need that pitch bend. Then I always have that version, so it's sort of like a little extra thing to do. Now, for the initial bass sound, without all the effects on it, and you can see I'm doing quite a lot, the bass sound that I started off with sounds like this. So you can hear that last note, it's just the root note. Now, I'm gonna close my window for now because my dog is barking outside. That should keep the barking down a bit. The actual patch is an operator patch. I'm using the first routing option, as you can see, so nothing advanced going on right there. I've set it to one voice. That's the first thing I've done. Oh, one voice. Because I want this to be monophonic. I want to be able to have those pitch bends in there. So I then also, right under the pitch tab, I enabled the glide option and I gave it a glide time of 219 milliseconds. That will help to make sure that the glide is not instant. So when I add that higher note, it's not immediately going to that higher note. It's going to take 290 milliseconds to actually arrive at the destination node that I've just layered on top of my root node. Now, for the actual patch, if I turn off the two other operators that I'm using, we have a square wave. So the initialized patch without the additional modulation on it, using the other two operators, actually sounds like this. So that's just a square wave. Then I took a triangle wave, and it's set to a chorus of 2, and if I bring down the fine tune, and I'm gonna slowly bring up this this second operator. So this is the, I'm gonna go to the G sharp note. This is the square wave, and then I'm gonna add in that little bit of the triangle. Now, you might have not heard any difference, because it is really small. Now, the other thing I did is I wanted that bass to have some movement, and I want that movement to speed up when I go to a higher note on my keyboard. So a way to do that is to use detuning. Now, we're using FM synthesis, and there's not really well, there is a detuning option. We've got the spread option right here, which I haven't used, by the way. But another way to detune this sound is to actually detune one of the operators from the other ones. So I've done that, and I brought the fine tuning on the second operator up to 23. Now, what that's gonna do, now we should actually hear the effect of this second operator. So it actually sounds really weird right now, because we're getting some pitch movement actually on this sound now. If I bring that level down, you can really hear what it's doing. Now, I didn't how do I say that? On the main bass sound with the pitch movement in it, you can now clearly hear that on the higher notes, that movement will actually speed up. Maybe I'll just play a higher note on my keyboard just to show you. Gotta turn on the keyboard. Right. So that's the root. And we can move up. So you can hear that movement speeds up. Now, that's great, because that's pretty much the characteristic sound of a Reese bass. However, I wanted to give that movement a little bit more character. So I went in and I took a third operator, which is set to a Sol 3. So it's basically a Sol, but only the first 3 harmonics of a Sol wave. And if I bring the level all the way down and just play a note, and now I'm gonna bring that level up. And we should get a point where it's starting to distort. Right here. You can hear it coming in. There. So that's the actual sound I really like in this patch. And now that movement still speeds up. So as you can hear, it sounds pretty damn interesting. Then that's actually it for the operator patch. I also layered a simple sine wave sub underneath, just to reinforce the bass. Give it a bit more bass. Then I also added a glue compressor on the end, which is using a lot of makeup gain and quite some compression. Now that's just to reinforce the actual bass sound and to even out all the levels. Sounding pretty good. I'm gonna bring down the volume of everything. Like that. So, what I did then is I added a whole bunch of processing to the mid-range. The first thing I did is I wanted to add some additional stuff to the actual sound here, and I added an audio effect rack. I don't really know why I've done that. I didn't really have to do this in an audio effect rack. I could have just done this in a chain itself, but I don't know, I added an audio effect rack. It's nice because you can instantly just mute all these 5 effects, which is quite helpful. The first thing I added to this bass is a chorus. Now, a chorus will actually introduce a lot of stereo separation. So before the chorus, we had a really static monophonic sound. It's only one voice, so it's really centered. And I added that chorus to give it a bit more stereo width. So it's actually being chorused quite a lot. Then I took a phaser, and that phaser has a really low dry wet. The dry wet on the chorus is pretty medium. It's 40%. On the phaser, I'm using a really low dry wet. It's just adding in a little bit more additional movement. I don't even think you hear it that much. But that's what's being added in, but only on a really small amount. It's just there. It's not really needed, that step, but you can do it. It's I like it, to just give it a little bit more movement, even though it's not really that upfront. Then I added the flanger. Did the same thing, really low dry wet. Just using the LFO to give it a bit more movement. And this is all just there to make sure that the sound is not boring, I guess, and it gives it a little bit more character. Then I've added an EQ8, and this EQ8 is basically just taking out all of the low frequencies and the sub frequencies, because I'm bringing those back in with a separate sub. So it's actually taking out quite a lot. And it's all up to preference, by the way, but I really liked, I wanted to take out that really loud harmonic that's in there. If I turn off the high pass, you can see we have a really loud subharmonic right here that's coming from the main bass patch, but we also have that harmonic around 100 Hertz that's sort of like moving up and down. See? And that harmonic, it's basically the result of detuning. That is what makes that harmonic move up and down. But because it's a low harmonic, it's pretty much close to the sub-frequency range. It's right above it. I feel that when I keep it in, it might actually start to interfere with the sub-bass, and it might actually push away the sub-bass by introducing phase cancellation. So if those two phases of that particular harmonic and the phases of the sub-bass don't align properly, what you're going to get is that the sub-bass will cut out. And if the sub-bass is going to cut out, you're going to get a less solid, a less in-your-face bass response. And we don't want that. We need a solid sub-bass on this bass patch. So I simply take it out. Just get rid of that harmonic altogether and add it back in with the sub-bass. So as you can see, this is that harmonic. It's almost gone. It's just slightly there. That's not really a problem anymore. It's way too low to actually interfere with the sub-bass. The sub-bass will now just overpower that particular part of the harmonic. It might add a little bit of detuning, but it's going to be so small, it's not worth bothering with. then I added a reverb. Now, this is pretty cool because I added the Ableton stock reverb, and I'm adding this reverb just as sort of like a sound design element, because this is not really a sound that has a lot of gaps in between it. It's basically just a sustained bass sound. So if I'm going to add reverb to this, it's only going to add that reverb to the actual bass sound. It's not really going to fill out any gaps or something with the reverb. It's just making the bass sound a little bit more filled out. And the great thing about it is that the tail of this reverb, you're not going to hear that in the final sound, because I'm going to do filtering after I've applied the reverb. So the reverb itself is also going to be filtered. However, adding that reverb, and you're definitely going to hear that on later steps in this resampling process, that reverb will at some points actually add in a bit of sound to that, to the actual final patch. You will be able to hear this reverb and another reverb that I'm using. I'm just going to go through this and you'll hear it within a second. Now, this reverb is, I don't know, it's a pretty standard setting. I think it's pretty much the default setting. I just brought down the decay time. It's really short, so we're just getting a bit of reverb sound. It also adds a little bit more of stereo width, so that's good. That's it for the rack. So then we're gonna move into the filtering, and I'm doing a bandpass filter, and the movement is actually that automation lane that you're seeing right here. So this is the movement on the filter frequency of the bandpass filter, and without that bandpass we had a pretty distorted sound right now, and then I add in that bandpass. So that bandpass actually gives it the movement that I wanted. I've just basically went through this randomly, just listening to it, playing it back, and just adding in a modulation. And then I copied it over to the single note, to just the root note, to get that same modulation, but just on the note of G sharp. Then I added another auto filter, which is a notch filter. So we have the bandpass moving along, but through that we're also using this one, which is our notch filter. So the notch filter actually cuts out frequencies, while the bandpass also cuts out frequencies. And by using these two together, you're gonna get a really interesting sound. So it's just there to add some character to the bass sound. And I quite like the sound of this. I quite like the way that notch filter sounds. And one final thing I decided to do is add an OTT, which is just a default preset for the multi-band dynamics. OTT right there. Just added that in, and that really helps. It's a characteristic compression preset for this multi-band compressor, and it really evens out the bass sound. It really brings basically all the levels up of the mids, high, and subs. So it really evens out all the levels. Now, the final thing I did is I added one third-party effect, and that's Valhalla Room. Just using the default preset. I actually don't think I changed anything. Room size is still 2 seconds, and I think that's a default preset. So the only thing I did is I basically just cut out all the sub from the reverb send, just to be sure. That is going into the master track, And on the master track I have a glue compressor. I didn't have that glue compressor when I did the resampling, by the way. I just added that in on the end to make sure that we're not gonna clip. So with that reverb send, we're actually, because this reverb is actually applied after the filtering, we're gonna get one reverb that's applied before the filtering that actually only contributes to the sound design aspect of the sound, and then we have a reverb that's being applied after the filtering, and that will give the bass sound a bit more ambience. Now, if I'm gonna export this bass sound, I'm not gonna keep on the reverb. I'll take the reverb off if I'm gonna export this. But because I am gonna run this actual thing through another process of resampling, this reverb will also become part of the sound design. Just not right now. In this actual sound, the reverb now would be a mixing element. You know, there's nothing going on in this project other than the bass sound, but if we were putting this in a track and adding that reverb on the send, it would pretty much be a mixing element. But what I've done is, after I've created this patch, I recorded it into this one. And as you can see, we have a reverb till. That is the reverb coming from the send. So that's our recorded sound. It's just that track recorded in, and I've done nothing on this track. So the second step of this 3-step process is just recording the sound and throwing it into a sampler. That's the second step. It's nothing big. So then we arrive to the third step, and that's where I actually process this further with Ableton Live's sampler instrument. I'm again gonna turn off the reverb, and let me turn off these effects. And what I am gonna do now is turn on the glue compressor on the end, which I've set to soft clipping, so it's just not gonna clip. I like to use soft clipping on bass sounds too, just cranking up the makeup gain a lot, just to reinforce the bass and make everything loud and punchy. It's really great. So we have this. I've thrown this audio clip into this sampler, and I turned on the looping mode, the sustain mode, and normally I use this one, but I decided to use the forward-backward version, and I like the loop back and forth version. It's quite interesting because we get some reversed parts as well. Now, when I now play a note, that's really low. You can see it basically loops back and forth. That's really interesting. I really like that kind of character, because when we are going to move up into higher pitches, that movement will also speed up, and that's really cool. So what I've done is, on the pitch tab, I've done quite a lot. I enabled the pitch envelope, and that pitch envelope, I'm going to talk about that later, because it's really important that you can do a lot of stuff with this, and you can really create interesting movements on the start of the sound or on the end of the sound if you want. The other thing I did is I turned on glide right here, and I brought the time up to 328 milliseconds. This is just completely random, just whatever you want to do. Doesn't really matter. I then added in a similar MIDI pattern as the one I did earlier, just slightly different notes. There's no pitch bending going on in this one. I had an initial pitch bend, but I haven't really used it, so you don't have to worry about that. You can see the notes. It's right there. And that pitch envelope does quite some stuff. If I just play the main root node, this is just the same sound as this. It's exactly the same. But when I add the pitch envelope, did you hear that? That's quite interesting. And the sound of that is actually determined by this. I can set this to 24. Now it's much less pronounced because it's going into a much lower pitch. But I like that 48. And the envelope itself determines a lot how this is going to sound. And then we have the decay time, of course. I just liked it like that. There's another thing you can do, and that's pretty cool. I haven't done it on this one, but it's really interesting, so I'm gonna show you it. On the envelope, on the pitch envelope, and also on the oscillator envelope right here, you have a loop option. So we can set this to loop, and it's gonna set it to a particular time. As you can hear. But we can also set it to a beat mode, and that's pretty cool. So we can basically just repeat that pitch envelope. Now, this might be a little bit too much for something like that. That sounds a bit better. For this one I haven't used it because I wanted that really fast high pitch envelope at the start. Now the great thing is right here it actually it works together with that higher note. See? It's pretty cool. What have I done else? I haven't really done much other things, I guess. Yeah, I brought the volume up to 0 dB and brought this one down. I think it's at 30% or something by default. What that's going to do, it's actually when you play a lower velocity on your keyboard, it will be a lower sound in volume as well. I didn't want that, I just wanted it to be the same volume for every note I play, so I just done that, brought it down. One more thing, I've added a pitch bend range of 12 semitones, so if I want, I can bend this up or down a full octave. I'm not doing it right here, but I could do that. Yeah, another thing that really determines how this final sound is going to be is the actual looping, the loop itself. I can change the length of this loop to something much shorter. I can change the sustain mode. Oh, that's pretty cool. So you can really see how you can create interesting stuff with this. You could also reverse it, which gives a quite interesting sound as well. That's it for the sampler. Then I went into an audio effect rack, and this rack splits up the audio into 3 separate chains. I've got a low chain, which is just the sub, so everything below 120 Hertz. It's just a sub bass. Then I have the mid layer, which is just the mids, and this also doesn't get any processing whatsoever. And then I added a high layer, And that high layer gets a lot of processing. So if I turn it off, so you can hear before and after. Sounds exactly the same because I'm just splitting the sound up in different bands. But that's, for instance, the high frequencies. I decided to add a chorus with a medium dry wet. This makes the high frequencies even wider than they are already. Then I added an enhance preset of the overdrive effect. Enhance. Enhance will only, well, what it says, it enhances the high frequencies of the sound. So it only, as you can see, it only affects the high frequencies. It's just a really small, it makes the high frequencies a tiny bit crispier. I don't know if you can hear that. I decided to add a camel fat, which is the only third-party effect next to Valhalla Room that I'm using for this one. And, oh no, wait, I'm using one more. Sorry. I've got this one, it's just a default preset, but the only thing I've added in is 10% of tube distortion and 74% of excita. So that excita will actually make these high frequencies even more crispier. See? Really brings up the high frequencies. If we hear the final sound without the camel fat, almost sounds low pass at some points. And then we add in the camel fat. Really brings that high frequencies up. And that's it for the rack. So I've done that. So this is before the rack. And this is after. Then I applied an additional low pass filter, and this is the automation for it. I just wanted to bring out some of that higher frequencies during some parts of the sound. I'm doing the same thing here. And then one final step is I added a Maximus, and this is just adding multiband compression to bring everything up. Haven't done anything to the low end because the low end was already pretty solid. So mids have gotten just a little bit of additional compression, and the highs quite a lot, just to bring up those high frequencies, and then another additional compression on the master. That's before, and that's after. Really evening out the levels, making sure nothing is going to exceed 0 dB. And on the master we have the glue compressor, which is doing nothing actually, it's just using the soft clipping to make sure we're not clipping on the master. So that's it. That's how I went from that square wave Risi kind of thing into this almost Koan soundish kind of thing. Sure, one thing before I forget, the reverb. On this one I've also added the send reverb, just to give it that nice atmosphere, that nice ambient sound. I guess that really finishes the sound. It really sounds much better with that on it. So I can show you a bit what you can do with it. We could add some spread. We could do that. This is actually going to make it even wider. The only thing we would have to do is make sure the sub is not getting too low. See, we're losing quite some sub by doing that, I guess. Well, not even that much, but I might wanna compress the sub. But it's not really something I wanted to do. I think this sounds pretty good already. So that's it. That was another bass design number 16, I think. If you have any requests for a bass design video, if you want to know how to make a certain kind of bass sound, then leave a comment below, ask it here, or come to my forum. I've released my new forum on my website. It's now up and running, and you can actually come there and ask your questions, and I'll be able to respond them much easier than when you put them on YouTube, because on my forum I can actually go and type a well-written response. I can even add in screenshots if I want. I can do a lot of things basically, and it just makes it a neat place for everyone to come to learn a lot of things about music production. So if you want to check out that forum, you can come to my website, which is www.artfx-studios.com. Click forum in the menu, and then you can actually come and post there. I'm doing a Q&A right now on the forum, so you can actually ask me anything you want, and I'll respond to those questions. There's going to be more Q&As coming up soon with other artists as well. And I'm also going to be doing a competition pretty soon. I'm going to be giving away a few copies of a few synths. And it's going to be interesting. We're just going to see how that's going to go. Other than that, I hope you liked this video. If you liked it, subscribe to this channel, and I hope to see you back. Well, I think tomorrow, Tutorial Tuesday. See you back soon. Peace.